So we have Dr. Claire Merrifield back again for the second time. First time was the endocrine system, and this time we're talking about the microbiome, some immunity. Claire, thanks for being here again. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Really good to be back.
Yeah. I really love that last episode, and I think this one, and this is really your wheelhouse from what I remember you saying and what you're working on quite a bit. So let's get into it. Let's talk about the microbiome.
Sure. So the microbiome, we'll mainly talk about the gut microbiome, but we have microbiomes in various different places, which we can get onto later. The microbiome is basically this vastly complex ecosystem of microbes that lives within us. So that means bacteria mainly, but we're also talking about viruses, protozoa, fungi, and archaea, which we don't know as much about. But we know that we've got trillions of these microbes that live in our gut. We know that we've actually got about as many microbes as we do human cells in our body. So there's loads. But what's more interesting is that if we think about the genetic contribution of those microbes, we're actually only about less than 1% human in terms of our DNA, our genetics, which is pretty kind of crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, that's wild.
Well, actually, I'm less than 1% human. So what on earth?
What am I?
What am I? Am I just actually a bacterial vat that's walking around for the enjoyment of the bugs that live within me? And a lot of researchers are really interested in this question. What are these microbes doing there? And now we know they're doing quite a lot. They are important in helping us develop our immune system. They help us develop our tolerance to food. Of course, we have to be able to absorb food to survive, but food is a foreign organism. So our immune system in the rest of our bodies, we see a virus or a bacteria coming through the skin or through our nose, we try and fight it off. That's what the immune system is for. But the immune system in the gut has to be very much more selective and be able to say, actually, no, I will accept some food, but I don't want to accept some salmonella, for example. And it's the gut microbiome that's training that immune system, and that we think does a lot of the work in helping us kind of manage that balance. So it's really vastly important for allowing us to survive, allowing us to eat. As I said, it develops our immune system, and it sort of shapes a lot of our immune interactions. It helps us sort of also shapes the lining of our gut as well. So it makes sure that we've got a good gut barrier, so that we stop bacteria getting in that we don't want there, and keeps the lining of the gut healthy. We also know it does things like control our weight. So it helps us know when we're full. So that works by eating things like fiber. The fiber will get down to the colon. Our bacteria will degrade that fiber and turn it into these short-chain fatty acids, one of which is called butyrate, which is a really important molecule for keeping the lining of the gut healthy. It feeds the lining of the gut. It reduces our risk of colon cancer, but it also tells our body to produce GLP-1, which you've probably all heard of because that's our weight medication, right? So we can produce our own GLP-1 by eating fiber, which
I don't think many people know that, actually.
I don't think many people know that, and we certainly don't eat enough fiber as a Western civilization, by a long way, and we can certainly get into that later if you're interested. That is one of the major roles of the gut microbiome, is kind of keeping our weight stable, and we need to support that function because we're struggling to do that ourselves, of course, in modern society. But beyond kind of extracting energy from food and helping us produce vitamins, we know that it's important in metabolism. It impacts our glucose metabolism, our fat metabolism. It communicates with us in so many different ways. And I guess it might seem obvious, right, that the gut microbiome is there. It's impacting the lining of the gut, the immune system in the gut, maybe processing food. But we're now starting to understand that it's actually involved in lots of other systems like the brain. So you've probably heard of the gut-brain axis, which
Yes.
is this idea that our brain talks to our gut and vice versa. And we know that the gut microbiome is really intimately associated with that, to the point where we're now starting to understand that some mood disorders might be linked to the gut microbiome. People are trialing using things like probiotics to try and help with depression and low mood and anxiety. It's early days, but there's some promising results with that, which is quite exciting. And might interest some of your audience that we know that your gut microbiome can influence your motivation to do exercise, for example. So it's kind of fascinating that you've got this ecosystem of bugs, basically, that are doing all sorts of different things in our bodies. We know quite a lot about them, but we know there's an awful lot more that we don't know about them. And we're really just starting to learn more because we've got better sequencing technology to be able to look at them. But yeah, it's a really exciting area of science. And I think it's kind of captured a lot of the public's imagination because it's almost seen as this different organ that we can manipulate, we can change with our lifestyle and with the sort of drugs we take, which we can't really do with our other organs.
Yeah. I'm fascinated by the interest in the gut microbiome. It kind of feels like this topic has had an explosion in popularity alongside of sleep at the same time. Kind of similar time frame of like, oh yeah, this is important. Besides the sequencing and things you discussed, why do you think this has become such a hot topic over the last, I would say 5 years, 5 to 10 years?
I mean, it's interesting. I mean, lots of it is because the technology has changed. When I started learning about this 10, 20 years ago, we just didn't have the technology to know what we now know. It was really, really expensive to do the gene sequencing, really hard. And that has exploded recently. So the
Yeah.
amount of publications that are coming out are massive. But I also think it's captured the public's imagination in a way that sort of talking about your heart or your liver just doesn't do, because it's kind of just like, oh wow, there's this I've got all of these bugs inside me, which feels a bit gross and weird. But also they're doing all sorts of different things, and that's quite kind of exciting. And I do wonder whether people feel that there's an element of I don't really know how to say this, but it's almost like because it's not you in the same way that your body is you, is it easier to think about, well, I'll change my microbes rather than I'll change myself?
Interesting.
So I don't know. That's just a
Yeah.
a thought.
I'm thinking about this too is because even when I started in the business 25 years ago, I mean, no one talked about the microbiome, like no one, not among, but now my clients talk about it all the time. They're discussing it. And I wonder for you, because it's so popular, what are some of the, I want to say this, misnomers about it? I think this is in the category of it could feel a little like, hey, we're trying all this crazy stuff to influence our gut flora and all this stuff. Like, what's
Yeah.
real and what's not real? Like that actually is
Yeah.
helpful.
I mean, that's a great question. And I think what's happened is that we've got this really, really, really complicated system that I doubt will ever honestly fully be able to explain. But yet you've got people, influencers, people on social media, people who don't necessarily understand the complexity, that want to sell you a product around it or sell you a program around it. And they are oversimplifying the system. So what I hear is people saying, this is what's happening. We know this, we know that. I'm just going to do this cleanse for a week and then I'll be all sorted. It is not that simple, right? So even amongst the most established gut microbial researchers, we can't actually decide what is a healthy gut microbiome, right? So, you took all of the stuff that you'll hear from potentially your clients and online. We just need to take a massive step back from that, because actually, if you sit in a room with, I'm sorry, and I have done this, I've sat in a room with 20 of the most eminent gut microbiome researchers in the world. There is not a single definition of what is healthy. There is also not a single definition of what is unhealthy, what is so-called dysbiosis. Yeah, so you've heard of symbiosis, which is this idea that we live in harmony with our gut bugs. They're helping us, we're helping them. It's all lovely. And the opposite of that is this dysbiosis, where they're all kind of not really getting on very well. Their community structure is broken, and that's causing us problems. Now, theoretically, that happens, and we kind of know that that happens, but we don't have a clear way of measuring that. Right. So whenever you hear somebody online saying, do this, it will improve this, or it will stop you having dysbiosis or whatever, but they're just not being honest with you, because we
Wow.
can't do that. And we just can't measure that. There are things that we can use as proxies to know what's healthy and what isn't, but people are overselling that massively at the moment.
I think it's
So
hugely overselling, because I've heard that so many times. Do this to improve your
yeah,
gut microbiome. But what you're saying is actually, I hadn't heard this before. Pretty interesting. So what is it that you can say that you do know about this, of like what's unhealthy or
yeah.
maybe sliding in the wrong direction?
Yeah, sure. So maybe I'll just rewind slightly and talk about how we decide that. So
Yeah.
part of what makes this really complicated, right, is that everybody is very different. We know that you and I are going to have totally different gut microbiomes, but that doesn't mean that you're healthy and I'm not, or the other way
Yeah.
around.
Yeah.
That we can have this totally different ecosystem, but both be perfectly healthy. Right. And so that's really complicated, because that's not the same as our other organs. If your heart has, only got 3 chambers and mine's got 4, one of us is going to have a problem.
Yeah, that's right.
And so it just works quite differently from what we're used to knowing. So we kind of, there's things that we look at to say, well, do we think this makes is healthy or not? So one of the markers that we often use, and you might have heard about, is diversity. So that is basically looking at all of the gut microbes and saying, have you got lots of different bugs there, and is there lots of different bugs? Because we know that certainly in the gut, and this is not the case in the vaginal microbiome, but in the gut, we want to, generally speaking, have a diverse microbiome. So people will use that as a measure of health. So they'll say, okay, if I take this tablet, or I take this thing, or I do this diet, and the diversity increases, that means that this tablet or this thing is positive, which works a little bit, but not always, because we know that, for example, breastfed infants have a very low diversity in their gut microbes, and that's because breast milk promotes certain types of bacteria blooming. So it doesn't always mean that it's a bad thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So diversity is part of the picture. And the other thing that we do is we look at the bugs that we have there, and we know quite a lot about certain bacteria, particularly things that we would often use as a probiotic, and we would say, okay, well, we know that that typically is associated with health. So if you have more of that, then we think that this thing that you're doing is good. We know that this bacteria is typically bad, and therefore we can make those assumptions. So we've got some broad strokes how we actually decide what is positive or negative for the gut microbiome, but it is by no means perfect. What we do know is generally always good for the gut microbiome. There's a few things to consider, but let's talk about diet first. Now, fortunately, all of these things are the same things that you would know anyway that are going to benefit your health. But we know that eating fiber, as I said earlier, is really, really important for the gut microbiome. And that's because it feeds it. So it provides the actual raw material for the gut microbiome to metabolize and create these health beneficial compounds. Fiber, and that's eating things like fruits and vegetables. It's also making sure that we eat polyphenols. So polyphenols only are only beneficial because they're metabolized first by the gut microbiome. Okay, so eating your coffees, tea, chocolate, your colorful fruits and vegetables, really great for the gut bugs. Eating fiber with fruits and vegetables, but also legumes, seeds, nuts, pulses, beans, all of the kind of things that we know are good for us, and whole grains are great as well. Reducing ultra-processed food is the other one. And again, we know that that's beneficial for our health in many ways. Part of the reason, well, there's a couple of reasons why that can impact the gut microbiome. Partially, it's because it doesn't feed it, right? So your super ultra-processed foods, like your biscuits, your white sliced bread, that's designed to be absorbed really early on in the gut, almost totally, and give you this big sort of dopamine hit, sugar rush. So you think, oh, what a delicious thing, let me eat some more of it.
Right.
And almost none of it makes its way down to the colon, which is where most of our gut bugs live. So you're depriving your gut bugs of food, which is important. But also we know that lots of these ultra processed foods, they've got things in them which seem to, or we think in animal models, affect the gut microbiome. So things like emulsifiers, there've been experiments using quite high doses of those, to be fair, in mouse models, but they can cause quite a lot of intestinal disruption. So we know that there's lots of components within those which are bad for us. We think it's because it's negatively impacting the gut microbes. So diet, broadly speaking, more fiber, less ultra-processed foods, less sugar. Gut bugs don't actually like single sugars. They like kind of complex sugars. If you give them too much sugar, they can actually turn and start eating your mucus layer and cause more problems. They don't like alcohol very much. They don't like smoking. So many of the things that your average cardiologist probably wouldn't like either.
Okay.
So that's diet. The other thing that's really important to consider, which again, I don't think most people know about, that stress plays a massive role, a massive negative role in our gut bugs. So we know, we did experiments quite a long time ago doing things like stressing out gibbons, which is quite sad. But we found that actually depleted this quite important bacterial species called lactobacillus, which we often see in probiotics. And that caused the gibbons to be much more likely to get colitis, the inflammation of the gut. And there's been loads of other animal studies basically showing that stress negatively impacts the microbiome, which then has impacts on the rest of our health. So increasing our risk of cardiovascular disease, diabetes, mental health issues, etc. Exercise is another one that's obviously key for your listeners. We know that by and large, people that engage in regular exercise typically have a more healthy profile in terms of their gut microbes. Of course, it's very hard to unpick whether it's just that they're healthier because they tend to eat more and do other things, or whether it's the actual exercise itself. But there is some mechanisms as to how it might be the case that exercise actually positively affects our gut bugs. And we know that things like taking prebiotics, so that's a specific type of fiber which is designed to boost levels of good bacteria, and some probiotics can be really beneficial for the whole ecosystem. And I should say antibiotics obviously can negatively impact it, so it's something to be aware of.
What's the, we mentioned you were talking about, about nutrition. I noticed that you didn't mention meat consumption, or in terms of, the gut microbiome and health. Well, I was thinking when you talked about, this is a wraparound point, that so much, at least in the United States, I don't know how it is where you are, but, so much of the meat production is factory farmed with heavy amounts of antibiotics and hormones, things of that nature, which would seem to be pretty negative. I would think, just speculating, for the gut biome. What's your stance on that?
Yeah, it's a tricky one because there haven't been enormous amounts of research specifically on kind of different types of meat, like factory farmed versus non-factory farmed. We know that things like the Mediterranean diet, which doesn't have a huge amount of red meat in, is generally beneficial for the gut microbes. We know that in kind of test tube settings, red meat causes problems with our gut cells and can essentially lead the gut microbes to produce some quite nasty chemicals. But there's also been some research that essentially, as long as you eat enough fiber, that mitigates that effect
Oh, really?
to an
Okay.
extent. So there was quite an interesting study by an American researcher where they basically took a load of people from a part of Africa where they typically eat really high levels of fiber, and they gave them a kind of Western diet. So
Yeah.
basically, burgers for a couple of weeks, and they just looked at what happened, and it was quite a startling effect. But they found that actually you can eat the red meat as long as you kind of have enough fiber in your diet. So, I think general gut dietary guidance is to reduce red meat. I don't know if you know Peter Attia's work. He's done quite an interesting
Yeah.
kind of deconstruction of that. So it is, I would say, the jury is out a little bit.
Yeah.
But I tend to try and eat meat that is very fat farmed and
Yeah.
not have antibiotics and hormones as much as you possibly
The
can.
problem is that in America, 99% of the meat is factory farmed. So it's very difficult to find meat that is non-factory farmed, or that is, I mean, not treated horribly for that. And I try not to. I don't want to have like a confirmation bias. I'm a vegetarian, so I don't eat meat. But I like to look at the data. I want to look at data and see what it is. And I also find it interesting that I don't know if you've kept up with this, but we have a new food guide pyramid, and it's like the opposite of the last one. So it's all heavy meat consumption, especially red meat consumption, and whole milk, and a lot less grains, so, vegetables, but like heavy protein consumption, like double protein consumption, which any cardiologist, I trained several cardiologists, would tell you this is an association with cardiovascular disease, the number one killer in the US, of people, which is very modifiable. So I'm just curious. I hear that, but then I start thinking about the gut biome. I think, well, what's the relationship there as well with that? And it just feels like, depending on the competing interest of these industries, may not actually be providing accurate information about how this actually affects people.
It's so difficult, isn't it? Because you've got to take into account, we know that we're probably not eating enough protein as a society. So then if you increase your protein requirements, well, where does that protein come from? Often it will come from animal sources.
Yeah.
But there's very few, lots of the data that looks at this really looks at these kind of specific dietary patterns, like the Alternative Healthy Eating Index, the Mediterranean diet, the MIND diet, the dietary approaches to stop hypertension. All of those focus on low saturated fat. Know that all of those, typically, when you look at the microbiome of the people that are following those, they're typically more positive. We know that you've got to have a good variety of different sorts of fruits and vegetables within your week in order to get that diversity, which we know is important. So going heavy on the red meat does not seem like it's going to be a positive step towards that. But I don't see a problem with people eating it in moderation as long as they're having lots of fiber with it. So it's things like, if you're going to have a chili, have it with brown rice, which is a whole grain. Have it, put a load of vegetables in it, put a load of beans in it, and then you're getting quite a lot of protein, but you're also getting some fiber with it. And I guess it's tough in the States when you've got this problem. Your factory farming,
It's horrible.
have a lot better choice, I think, over here.
Yeah, I think in Europe is, I lived in Europe growing up a little bit, but it was a very different time. But I haven't been there in a while. But it seems, just from peering on the outside, there's just a very different idea related to this than we are over here, extremely focused on protein through meat, and there's just a very large stigma if you're not a meat eater regularly. It's still a pretty big stigma, although there's a lot more plant forward options now in the United States. It's such an overwhelming population of meat eating that you're essentially an outcast if you don't. I think like vegetarianism is only like 4% of the US population, and certainly veganism is 1%, less than 1% population. So it's, to me, and I look at the data are telling me that what has been pretty clear from cardiologists, the American Cardiology Association, is very heavy on vegetables, fiber, grains, and less red meat.
Mhm.
And but then we put out conflicting information through our government and saying like the opposite of that. So then it confuses people, and they're like, well, what's the right thing? And then when you start about the gut biome, forget about it. I mean, it's like,
Yeah.
oh, okay, that's like kind of nebulous to a lot of people too. But then they grab onto it like, oh yeah, my gut biome is so amazing. And it's like, okay,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
you know,
Well, I mean, I can tell you that there's no study that says it's good for your gut biome to eat a load of red meat or a load of meat, period.
right,
But I think the jury's out, and if you eat, a moderate amount of meat as part of a really
right,
rich,
right,
really based diet, it seems to be okay. Um,
yeah,
but it's definitely not a good thing to do lots of it. And in fact, one of my old professors said that they were trying to do a study on looking at the impact of the gut microbiome on colorectal cancer in vegetarians and meat eaters. And he was like, but we couldn't actually find enough vegetarians that had cancer because they don't tend to get it. And, that's kind of startling, isn't it? You just think, oh, okay.
can't find enough of these people, right? They're like,
Yeah. But lots of this thing that lots of the data ends up being, because if you end up eating loads of things like, if you eat a load of McDonald's or a load of burgers with your ultra processed bread, then that just takes up lots of your food space. You don't have the capacity to eat all of the other things which are healthful. So there is a bit of a, yes, that's bad, but also you're also missing out on all of these really good things because you're not
yeah,
eating them, because you're eating the other stuff instead. So
yeah.
it's very tricky for people
What's
to
the
navigate.
I had a question about, you talked about the microbiome like in the colon.
Mm.
What's the relationship the with that related to, I would say, defecation, or
Mhm.
in terms of the regularity or the healthfulness of that system?
Yeah, good question. It's important, we know, but I don't think we know exactly um, what it's doing there, if that makes sense.
Okay.
So we know that it's communicating with the enteric nervous system. So we have a gut brain, basically our nervous system in the gut that is important in our motility. Um, a- and it's really tricky to unpick, right? Because when we're doing these studies, we're taking poo samples, but of course, people that are prone to constipation, the poo is going to have been there for different amounts of time to people
Was
who go quite a lot. So we haven't really got a really good handle on that, if I'm perfectly honest. It is, I'm sure it has a role, and we know that. We've got these disorders like IBS where people will often go much more or much less. It's not the only thing that's going on, but we know that probiotic can be really beneficial in helping to regulate that frequency.
interesting. Yeah, I just was curious when you said that. I was like, oh, I wonder what's going on there
Mhm.
with that. It almost seems like, you're talking about the bugs. It's
Mhm.
almost like the bugs are like either for or against. It's like, well, depending, I'm either going to help you or not. It's kind of depending on what's happening here.
But you said a really interesting thing there, because that's one of the things that we really don't quite understand, or it's quite hard to study, is because we've got this community, right, of bugs. So and we behave differently in different communities. So if you put me in an old people's home versus a, a, a preschool, I'm going to behave totally differently with those two types of people. And it's the same with our bugs when we're looking at when we're studying the population, we're just saying, oh, we've got this bug here, this bug there, that bug there. But we're not saying, well, actually, in this group, we've got a totally different interaction. And we know that groups of bacteria will form what we call sort of biofilms, and they can talk to each other and they can influence each other. And then that then influences us. And then we can also influence whether or not they form communities. So you're right in saying that it does depend a bit what else is going on. So that's what makes it so complicated and so fascinating, is that you've got inputs from everywhere. And it's not the case that I've got X bacteria in my gut and therefore that means this. Or I don't have it, therefore I need to replace it and everything will be fine. That's something that you'll hear quite a lot on social media, is just reducing it down to this one specific bacteria, which we know isn't the case. And we really can't study it in any way that is meaningful.
Wow, that's amazing, because I think like something like exercise has very tangible research related to it. I mean, we know that when a person exercises pretty regularly, especially let's say cardiorespiratory endurance, increases stroke volume, cardiac output, increases the thickness of the ventricles. Like we know this. Like it's very easy to like, oh, we can make this association and a variety of other factors, obviously. But like it sounds like here it's like we're still like not sure all the way of these direct associations.
Definitely. And I would say, we really, and I think I've already said this, but we know so little compared to what we could, or
Mm.
what we don't know is massive. And I think that's something that is not known. I think when I hear people talking about it, they're just like, oh, the gut microbiome is like this. All I have to do is this. It's like, fine. You're like, wow, it just doesn't work that way. And because, we've got different ecosystems, you and I, if we
Yeah.
both do something, some things might change in the same way beneficially, but other things might go completely the other way.
Yeah.
And it makes it tough. So what we're normally looking for in experiments is things that change altogether. So, for example, in people that exercise a lot, we know that you typically get more types of bacteria that produce butyrate. We've spoken about that. That's positive things. We look at that as a health marker. So we say, okay, most people who exercise typically have higher levels of butyrate, and therefore exercise is probably a good thing, right? Because it typically does this in all people. But we've also said we don't know exactly why that is. It may be the exercise. It may be that the diet is better in people who exercise. It's very hard to unpick. So it's a very, very, very complex.
Yeah. I mean, it just feels like there's so many factors involved. It's just so multifactorial that there's so much biodiversity or variability from human to human.
Mhm.
How can you know completely that this equals this?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And I find myself getting very frustrated when I hear people selling things or saying things online which essentially say that.
Yeah.
And we should have learned our lesson, like from doing things like in Australia, for example. What animals did we introduce, thinking that they would sort of sort all of the problems out in terms of their biodiversity, and it completely screwed up their whole
Yeah.
ecosystem. And we are doing the same thing, I think, with the microbiome. We're fiddling and meddling in things that we don't fully understand. That's not to say that we shouldn't do the things that we know are generally, broadly speaking, beneficial, because we know that they've got beneficial effects on health anyway. It's pretty simple stuff. Reduce your stress, sleep well, eat well, exercise.
Yeah.
You're going to hear the same thing from anybody talking about any aspect of health. But do you need to take certain types of probiotics? Well, some probiotics actually have got a really good evidence basis, and yes, they can be really beneficial. Some maybe don't, and some are maybe just sort of made up by somebody who wants to make some money. So you have to kind of really understand it a bit to make sure that you're not being taken advantage of, I think.
What was your interest in really diving into this? Where did that come from?
I I wanted to be a vet originally, ages ago, and I did a degree in veterinary pathogenesis, which was essentially the study of disease in humans and animals, which is obviously really important because we use animals to study human disease. And when I was there, we started to learn about, so this was about 25 years ago, we started to learn about the mucosal immune system, so this immune system in the gut, and this idea that gut microbes were important in helping us tolerate food, and we didn't really know very much about it. And it was all this kind of emerging science at the time. I don't know, I just found it absolutely fascinating. And what's interesting about it, as we've said, is because you can manipulate it in certain ways, even though it's very hard to study. We know that things like probiotics, for example, if you use the right probiotic at the right time in the right condition, that, irrespective of what's going on with the gut microbes, will have a positive effect. And then you start to think that just changes the shape of medicine. If you can deliver a a type of intervention that's as complex as a living cell, a living bacteria that's got multiple functions, that's very different from giving a very targeted drug. And I just got fascinated by it, basically. It has fascinated me for years and years. It still fascinates me. And but I think the fascination is there, but it's tempered with the reality of what we know. And the reality of knowing, well, how important is it really? And so I often say this to people, because people get quite, obsessed about this, and some people don't want to take antibiotics because they're worried about the effect on the gut microbes, and that can potentially be a really dangerous thing to do, or a dangerous stance to take. And I would say, I've seen a lot of people at the end of their lives, and I've never once walked away from a person and thought, if only they had a healthier microbiome, they would have been fine right now. I walk away from them thinking, God, if only they'd done a bit more exercise, they wouldn't be in this position right now. So, in the grand scheme of things, in terms of what's important, I don't think it's as important as things like exercise and managing our stress, which is probably why I've moved slightly away from it. But it doesn't mean that it's not a really exciting area of medicine. And I do think in the next probably 5, 10, 20 years, we're going to see some really great advances in this. And probably everything I say will just be totally rubbish by then. And you'll be like, what are you talking about, Claire? We know everything. And we can really target our interventions to it. And we know we can, look at Darian's gut microbiome, and we can tell him exactly when he's going to get this disease, and we can give him something to stop having it. So I really think there's a lot of potential in it. In a research capacity. I just think that the commercial side of things is maybe overtaking reality a little bit. To urge people to be a bit cautious, and maybe not to waste money on things that aren't proven.
So I don't know this, so I'm literally just asking, is there I'm going to say in quotations, testing out there that is done that can tell you the status of your microbiome?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And there's lots of different types of tests you can do. Most of the tests will tell you who is there. So as in how many of X type of bacteria you've got. Now, that can be interesting and as I've said, we can learn a little bit about the health of our gut microbiome by doing that testing. We can sort of say, right, well, we have quite a lot of what we call good bacteria, quite a lot of what we call bad bacteria. We have, a level of diversity that we associate with health. So it can give you a bit of a picture. I have been fascinated by the gut microbiome for over 20 years. I haven't ever got myself tested because I'm not sure that it would give me any useful information. I think what we're seeing is lots of companies that are doing testing, and they're saying that they can use that test to inform your nutrition, your diet, your supplements, your probiotic regime. And I'm pretty skeptical that we've got enough evidence to do that. We can certainly give you some dietary recommendations, but do I definitely need to test your gut microbiome to do that? Probably not, in all honesty, because there's probably going to be a pretty similar recommendation one way or the other. That might change, and the more research we do in this, the more likely that is to change. But yeah, we've got a lot of people saying, oh, we can see who's there and tell you what probiotics to take. Again, we talked about that. It's not really the right thing. The other thing to say is just knowing which bacteria you have and relatively how many you've got doesn't tell you anything about what they're doing. Right. And we've said that in different contexts, they're going to be doing different things. It's also the case that we know that different bacteria have got the same function. So you might have bacteria A, B, C, and I might have bacteria X, Y, Z. But if you look at the genetic capabilities, they're both capable of doing the exact same thing, which means that we have the same function. So actually, it doesn't matter whether or not they're different or not. So yes, you can test it. I think if you're interested and you've got money, go ahead. It's kind of an interesting thing to do, and you'll learn a lot about it. And, it might be one of these things that you test over time and you can see changes and great. But it's not something that you need to do. It's not going to give you any information about any conditions that you have. And anybody that tells you otherwise is not being fully honest with you.
Interesting. Well, we're debunking a lot of things here right now.
Yeah.
What about in like a role of in terms of sickness? I have colds, flu, anything like that. What's the microbiome, gut microbiome's role in, I guess, positively or negatively associating with that?
Yeah, so we know it's got a big role in the immune system in maintaining that and developing it. It helps us with our kind of barrier function. We've spoken about the barrier function in the gut, but also we have microbiomes kind of everywhere. And we know that, of course, if you have gaps in the cells in your nose, you're more likely to get kind of bacteria, viruses coming in. If you don't have enough mucus there to protect it,
Yeah.
you might get of that. And I guess we would say we don't really have any data to say that, people with X microbiome are more or less likely to get colds or flu. But we know that there's certain strains of probiotics that have been developed that reduce the amount of colds and flu that people get. So, we know that we can have positive benefits by giving positive bacteria. So just as a quick definition, probiotics are live microbes that when they're administered in enough quantity, they have a beneficial effect on the host. Now, there are certain types of probiotics you can take, which will reduce the length of a cold and reduce the amount of colds you have in a year. And so they've actually got better evidence for things like vitamin C.
Yeah.
Vitamin C, everybody takes that when they've got a cold, don't they? But actually, we've got a bit of data that says that maybe it's going to shave about 12 to 24 hours off a cold if you take high dose vitamin C. Still worth doing, I think.
Pretty worth it. Yeah.
It's worth it, but I think that probiotics have got better evidence, and certainly I give my daughter probiotics because she's always having colds, and I think one less would be fantastic.
Yeah. Well, so what would be an example of that probiotic that you're talking about that's easily accessible to people?
So I think in the States you've got different brands to me, so it's probably better I don't say the brands that are here. But what I can do is I can give you a link for the show notes,
Yeah.
and there's a really good resource where if people are interested in kind of evidence-based probiotics, there's some researchers have done some great work just looking at different conditions and saying which brands are proven to be good. So I'll give you that for your show notes.
That'd be great. There's just so much here. It's just what's interesting is like I feel like health is just such a minefield for misinformation and for jumping on the next big thing.
Yeah.
It's like this idea of like, how can I biohack myself to optimize my health and well-being? And it's not exciting to say, well, we don't really know a lot about this.
Yeah.
Yeah, that doesn't sell anything to people.
No.
But when they say, oh man, I got this thing, it's going to improve your gut flora and your gut, all this. But in the reality, that's why I love these type of conversations. It's like, and I always tell my students, I'm like, all this is just really nuanced. It's unless you're getting some things that we know that have pretty large associations, there's just so much variability to say definitively this is it. Like,
Yeah.
and I think that's what's exercise is so great because we have so much information. It's like, I mean, if you went to 100 people and said, is exercise good for you for most of your bodily systems? How many people would say no? Like, it almost have to be like, what are you talking about? Like, that's crazy to say that. It's kind of like cigarette smoking. How many people would say that's good for you? Like, I don't think anybody would say that, but it seems like in a lot of things, it's like we rush to this conclusion of this will help you. We actually don't even know completely.
Yeah.
So health is just such an interesting field. It feeds something very like gratifying for people. Like if I just do this, I'll feel better. I'll be better. Oh.
It's really interesting, isn't it? And I'd be interested to hear what your thoughts about this. But how many people do you think would say that cheese is good for you?
I think they'd be split on it on some level. Yeah, it depends. They'd probably ask what type of cheese. Where is it? A little bit more, but it's kind of But then I know a lot of people would be like, no, it's not good for you. And a lot of
Yeah.
people go, yeah, it's great. I mean, there's some really great cheese out there, you know.
Yeah.
Anything that has dietary recommendations, which is,
Mm.
as you spoke about, sounds a lot like that with the microbiome. When you start talking about nutritional wisdom related to it, it's like a big problem for a lot of people. It really is. Have you encountered this? Like, if you talk to someone about this, like, it's an issue.
It's a big issue. And the problem is, I think once people get a belief about something, it's very, very hard to undo it. So, I use cheese as an example because, somebody close to me is become very anti-cheese based on what a kind of alternative practitioner has told them. They've told them that it's anti-inflammatory, that it's pro-inflammatory,
Yeah.
which is not true. It's anti-inflammatory. In fact, many of our probiotics have been derived from cheese making bacteria.
Right.
We actually know, it's a fermented food. So you'll hear people talking about kefir and kimchi and how brilliant it is for you. You won't be able to see anybody say that they're not good for you.
Yeah.
But there have been hardly any studies in humans demonstrating benefits. But yet we know that cheese has got beneficial impact on our cardiovascular health. In fact, good fermented cheese reduces our risk of stroke. Right. But yeah, it's one of the first things that you'll hear people say is, oh, I've got high cholesterol, I better cut out the cheese. And so there's all of these sort of myths circulating. And what's difficult, I think, is that everybody thinks that they know more than they do. And they're very happy to dispense that advice. I sit at dinner tables with my family and I have to kind of bite my tongue because I don't want to, get quite aggressive about it. But I just think, would you give people financial advice in the same way that you're giving them health advice? You're actually giving people the wrong advice.
Right.
Which you wouldn't do for things which matter, and health matters.
Yeah.
But it's I don't know what we can do about it really, other than I think if you actually aren't a qualified healthcare professional, you don't understand how to read academic papers, just maybe refrain from giving your opinion to other people. But you try what you want in the your own home, that's fine. But, just be wary about what you tell other people, because people listen.
Yeah. Well, it's part of the confirmation bias I was saying. It's like if something you're doing works for you, you think it works for everyone. You're like, oh, this changed my life.
Yeah.
Then you get that belief, and then you get that obsession, and then it becomes your identity, and you make it your mission to proselytize about it to everyone, and not understanding that people are very different person to person.
Yeah.
Actually, I was just one of my favorite things is watching like documentaries about like health cults and stuff like that, because it's very similar to other types of cults. It's just a very similar mindset, an isolating idea, and lots of confirmation bias, and a guru or someone who has the answer. They have the answer. And I was just watching one about this doctor. Well, he actually ended up not being a doctor in the United States. Surprise. I was like, you just have these green drinks, just have all these green drinks and it'll cure your cancer. It's kind of the apple cider vinegar type of thing. It's like, that's very big, like that whole special about that if you just do this will change your microbiome. This will cure this disease that Western medicine can't do, and will have less side effects. So we just don't know a lot. But saying that, it sounds like ridiculous to people because no one wants to feel like they don't know anything. When there's nothing wrong with not knowing and just being like, I'm not sure,
Yeah. And I guess I'd say I've spent a lot of time with people that know an awful lot about an awful lot, and they're the people who are the least likely to give you advice. Because they know what they don't know, and I think that's what scientists and researchers do. They know what they don't know, and I think the best piece of advice I can give people who are a bit lost with the amount of stuff that's out there is that anybody who says things with absolute certainty, with no room for we don't know, and isn't willing to say we don't know, I would really question them, question their judgment, because there's nothing in health really that we know for certain.
Yeah, there's just very few things, but it's just such a minefield for quackery and fraud. In fact, I remember during my bachelor's degree in the United States here, I took a kinesiology 101 class, no, a health 101 class, and one of the lectures was on quackery and fraud. This was back in the 90s.
Yeah.
And it was so big back then. This was without social media and all this stuff back in the 90s. I mean, it has exploded now because of everyone has a voice. And everyone could just basically, without any real consequence, sometimes there's cases where people get sued and stuff like that. But most of the time it's like, I can just make this up and put it out there. And if you get and when we equate a large following with intelligence and knowing, and that I think has been the downfall. A lot of this stuff is that, if you see popularity, you equate it with intelligence and knowing. And you have to sift through that. But that actually may not be true.
Well, it's often more likely to be equated with sensationalism and things that you think, surely that's not true. And, I've seen biohackers say some really dangerous things about, melanoma's not caused by UV radiation, don't about the sunscreen. You're like, oh my God.
Gosh, that's crazy.
No, it's crazy, but people are out there saying it. And these are people who are health influencers, and they've got responsibility to their audience to not say things like that. And yet, all they really care about is how popular they are, how what else they're selling. So it's a big problem.
Do you have different regulations in UK about this? Are there any guardrails for this?
I mean, online there's very few guardrails, aren't there? I think I know that there has been TikTok have appointed a kind of health guardianship team, but I don't actually think that they're able to police all of these things.
Yeah.
It's certainly not something that most people would. Sorry, just got distracted for a minute.
It's okay.
It's certainly. Nobody with any kind of profession integrity would ever say those kind of things.
Yeah, that's right.
Of course, there's no repercussions if you're just a thing. And I get asked for comments about health trends in papers, and I got asked to comment on, again, talking about sunscreen, but beef tallow sunscreen. So people are sort of saying, oh, don't use traditional sunscreens because they've got all these chemicals in, use beef tallow instead, which is,
beef tallow sunscreen?
Yes, and then so I looked it up. I have no idea, but there are people selling it on Etsy here. They've just made their own sunscreen, which they've obviously had they have no, I guess, remit to have to prove that even works as a sunscreen. And then you've got people buying it because they think, oh, it's really good for my skin, and the other stuff is really bad. And you think, oh my God, this is just
what is happening?
What's happening? What is happening? We're almost kind of going back to the age where we prefer the quacks to the establishment. There's a kind of anti-establishment feel to it. I think people have started to distrust the pharmaceutical industry,
right?
And I guess there are some reasons. But there's also an awful lot of good scientists working in these organizations who are doing brilliant work, and we've got diseases that we can cure that we couldn't even test for 100 years ago. But yet people are kind of going back to these really archaic methods, and the problem is science is getting more and more complicated, right? So you try and read one of these microbiome papers without a PhD in the microbiome, it's like absolutely,
it's difficult.
It makes no sense to anybody. It's complete gobbledygook. So it's no wonder that people are finding it hard to speak truth, because it's very, very complicated, and you need a lot of background knowledge to be able to even understand the kind of basics of it.
Yeah, even my students, when they come to me and they have to do in-text citations and referencing for papers, and I said, this is an internet resource, like just a pop culture reference. I was like, don't use this. I'm not allowing you to use this. You need to go from a journal, peer-reviewed, reliable, valid, reproducible based journal text. But they're so inundated with top 5 things to improve your gut biome, 5 exercises that will give you great legs. And it's just like, and that's what you hear. That's what you see. You don't see the headline, we don't know about the gut microbiome all the way. We're unsure about all of the benefits or negatives. Sorry.
Yeah.
It's
It's
like,
exciting. It's exciting. We know a lot, and the stuff that we know we're excited about, but there's loads we don't know. Yeah, of
yeah,
course. Um,
yeah. People skip that.
yeah.
They're like, no, it's not giving me anything. I'm like, no, but it is. It's like, it's just not that sexy. It's not that exciting. It's,
Not that sexy. But I think we talked about this before. I think that, we all, and I'm not saying it about other people, I want a shortcut to things, right? I'd rather not have to go work out every day to feel good and to look good and to get that benefit. There isn't a way to shortcut that.
there's no
Like,
shortcuts. Yeah.
there's no shortcuts in anything. You can't shortcut your way to better mental health. You have to do the work. You have to do the journey. You've got to look after your sleep. You've got to eat right. You've got to
Exactly
work on
right.
relationships. It's all of the things that are actually uncomfortable. And I think there's a book called The Comfort Crisis. I haven't read it in its entirety, but it's that kind of thing that we just don't want to be uncomfortable in any way. So we're just looking for, I'll just do that quick cleanse, or I'll take that probiotic, take that supplement, and then that will fix everything. And of course it won't. But it will make us feel better for a while. And I think just something I was thinking about when you were talking about the quacks, part of the reason why lots of people get traction with these weird ideas or these sort of strange things that they recommend is that we have this amazing placebo effect, right? And we know that has a massive effect on how we feel, and it can do things like change our microbiome. It can change our our blood sugar. All sorts of things can change our actual physiology just by the way we think.
Yeah.
So if somebody comes on very convincingly and says, I've got just the thing that's going to make you feel amazing, and it's going to fix your gut microbiome, it's going to do all of this stuff, the power, even if what they're selling is absolute nonsense, the power of their placebo effect is actually quite strong, right? Whereas I'm here saying, well, this, that, the other is we know a lot, but we don't know everything. So I can't tell you for certain. It might work on you, it might not. Yeah, the thing that I might be giving you at the end of the day might be better. But because I'm not able to be fully 100% on things, you don't get that placebo effect. So it's a tricky one, because I'm pro the placebo effect, because I love our mind, feel our body much more than we allow it to at the moment, but not through disingenuous kind of claim.
Most definitely. This has been awesome. I mean, very different from our last episode. And, this is just, it's just such a big topic now when you're talking about immunity, the gut microbiome. There's just so much out there that is unknown. And so I'm happy that we've chatted about this, and, it's going to get in the hands of a lot of people who I think it's going to be, especially my clients, because I think this is going to be fascinating to them. Because everybody, it's one thing in the past that when I started working with people, there wasn't a lot of information on anything. Like the effort barrier was high. So if you wanted to find something out, you had to go to the library and you had to go through the stacks, and you had to find some, maybe even had to ask the librarian, where do I find books on this? Right? The effort barrier is high. So the people who actually crossed that effort barrier had a lot of information, but most people were just reliant on someone they were working with or something that. Now, when people come to you, they already have incredible amounts of information. The question is any of it good?
Yeah. And I just a cautionary statement for people who are asking AI or ChatGPT about the gut microbiome, because there's an awful lot of people posting things that aren't true. When you ask it a question, it's going to come back with untruths. Right?
Yeah.
Okay, so you kind of have to you have to limit your searches to peer-reviewed academic papers.
Right.
And even those take with a pinch of salt, because it's still very complicated, and the technology is quite different between different papers. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Claire. Appreciate you coming on again, and just a wealth of information. Yeah, I appreciate you.
Thanks for having me.
Of
really
course.
appreciate it. Lovely to speak to you, and hope you feel better soon.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.